The morning had started like any other, with the soft hum of the restaurant's air conditioning and the clinking of plates being polished for the day's service. The young waitress had been preparing herself for what she hoped would be a smooth shift. She was new to this upscale restaurant, where the tables were covered in crisp white cloths, and the silverware gleamed under the warm lights. Despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach, she had dressed neatly, tying her apron just right and adjusting her hair so it wouldn't fall into her face. The restaurant slowly began filling up as guests arrived, each one bringing their own air of importance and expectation. Some were laughing quietly with friends, others glanced at their phones or whispered to companions, but all had that unmistakable aura of wealth and comfort. The young waitress moved between the tables, carefully taking orders, balancing plates, and offering a warm smile wherever she went. It was hard work, but she liked the feeling of being in control, even in this busy environment. By late morning, a man entered the restaurant who immediately drew the attention of both staff and patrons. He walked with a confidence that only someone used to being noticed could possess. Well-tailored suit, polished shoes, and an air that made people instinctively step aside just a little. The young waitress had heard of him before. The stories floated in the city like whispers. A billionaire who seemed untouchable, whose presence alone could make the room feel different. He was seated at a corner table, and soon after, a few other well-dressed individuals joined him. Their conversation was quiet but carried an unmistakable sense of authority. As she approached the table to take their orders, the waitress felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had never served someone so famous before. The man looked at her and smiled, a smile that seemed to hold both amusement and curiosity. It was then that he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded note, handing it to her with a playful smirk. "I'll give you $10 million if you interpret this," he said, his voice smooth and confident, almost teasing. There was laughter in the air, but it was not cruel laughter. It carried the weight of someone who had never been challenged in this way before. The restaurant seemed to pause for a brief moment, the other guests glancing toward the table, sensing something unusual was about to unfold. The waitress's hands trembled slightly as she took the note. She unfolded it carefully, trying not to show her nerves. The writing inside was unlike anything she had seen in her school books. Strange symbols and a few foreign words she recognized only faintly. It looked complicated, almost impossible to decipher at a glance. She felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her, knowing that everyone in the room was curious to see how she would respond. For a few moments, she studied the note quietly, letting her mind absorb the patterns and the shapes of the characters. Her heart was beating faster, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She had always been good at noticing small details, at understanding things that others might overlook. Maybe she thought this was her moment to show that skill. The man leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the tension he had created. He was used to people hesitating, fumbling, or outright failing when faced with his challenges. But something in the waitress's calm, concentrated expression made him pause. There was no panic, no rushing, just quiet focus. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The waitress started moving mentally through the note, breaking it down into parts. She recognized some of the words, remembered bits and pieces of phrases she had encountered before in books or conversations. She used her intuition to fill in the gaps, connecting the symbols and words in ways that made sense. Time seemed to slow down for her. Around her, the restaurant continued its rhythm, the clatter of cutlery, the low murmur of conversations, but her attention was entirely on the task in front of her. Slowly, she began whispering the first few interpretations under her breath, testing them against the context. Some of it felt right, some uncertain, but she pushed forward. Each line she deciphered seemed to build her confidence, even as the room watched silently. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Guests who had been chatting quietly now turned their heads toward the table. Waitstaff paused in their routines, sensing that something remarkable was unfolding. The billionaire's smile had faded slightly, replaced by curiosity. He hadn't expected her to approach the note with such determination. The corners of his mouth twitched, unsure if he should continue with his amusement or start paying attention to the unfolding skill before him. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table, watching the young waitress work through the mysterious challenge with focus and precision. By the time she had finished reading the note once through, a quiet confidence settled over her. She had a sense that she understood its meaning, that she had pieced together the puzzle that had seemed impossible at first glance. She folded the note carefully and looked up at him, her eyes steady and calm. For the first time that day, she spoke clearly, explaining the essence of the message. A hush fell over the restaurant. The man, expecting hesitation or confusion, found himself silently listening, captivated. The young waitress's explanation was simple, precise, and accurate. She had taken something that seemed impossible and made it understandable. The elegance of her focus and intelligence was undeniable. Around the room, people exchanged quiet whispers, astonished at the unexpected turn of events. The man's laughter returned, but it was now mixed with genuine admiration. He hadn't expected someone to rise to his challenge so naturally. The young waitress remained modest, almost shy, but there was a quiet pride in her stance. She had faced a test she never asked for and had excelled. It was a moment that changed the way everyone in the room saw her, and perhaps the way she saw herself. For the first time, she felt the power of her own capability, a reminder that even small, unnoticed individuals can shine brightly when given a chance. The morning continued, but the energy at that table had shifted. Guests and staff alike felt the ripple of what had just occurred. The young waitress returned to her duties, carrying herself with a newfound sense of purpose. She knew that this encounter, brief as it was, would be remembered by everyone in that room for a long time. And deep down, she felt that her life had just taken a subtle but profound turn, one that might lead to unexpected opportunities and experiences she had never imagined before. After the initial encounter with the billionaire, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but a quiet buzz lingered in the air. Everyone seemed to be talking in hushed tones about what had just happened. The young waitress felt a mixture of relief and excitement. She had managed to interpret the note, and while the reward had been joked about, the attention she now received was unmistakable. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped down tables, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the thrill of what she had just accomplished. She glanced toward the billionaire's table, where he sat surrounded by his companions, their conversations now more animated, but still focused on him. Occasionally, he would look at her, a small smile playing on his lips, as if silently acknowledging her skill. She could feel his gaze, but it was not uncomfortable. It was respectful, almost curious. She returned to her tasks, carrying plates and drinks, but her mind kept drifting back to the note. What had it really meant? And why had he chosen her to interpret it? As the lunch service continued, she found herself observing the patterns of the restaurant in a new way. Each guest, each table, each interaction seemed like a story waiting to be noticed. She had always paid attention to details, but now it felt different. The world felt larger, full of possibilities she hadn't considered before. Her confidence grew quietly with each step she took, each tray she carried. Meanwhile, the billionaire leaned back in his chair, watching the young waitress with a sense of intrigue he rarely experienced. He was used to people being intimidated by him, falling into predictable reactions of awe or anxiety. But she had remained composed, solving his playful challenge with grace. There was something about her approach that was different, something that caught him off guard. He found himself studying her, trying to understand the mix of intelligence and humility she carried. A few moments later, he called her over once more. She approached cautiously, unsure of what he wanted but prepared to remain professional. He handed her another small note, folded neatly, and spoke in a tone that was lighter, but still tinged with amusement. "I have another challenge for you, if you're willing," he said, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. The room seemed to pause again, the quiet anticipation building like a gentle wave. She nodded politely, her hands steady as she took the note. The writing inside was different this time, slightly more complicated, but she could see patterns emerging, similar to the first note. Her heart raced, but not from fear. This was excitement, a challenge she wanted to meet. She focused, blocking out the surrounding sounds, and began working through the symbols and words in her mind. Slowly, methodically, she pieced together their meaning. As she worked, she noticed the subtle glances of other staff and diners. People were curious, fascinated by her determination and skill. The energy in the room shifted, moving from casual chatter to focused attention on her quiet concentration. She could feel the eyes on her, but she remained calm, drawing strength from her own abilities. She whispered the first interpretations under her breath, adjusting as she went along, ensuring that each step made sense and built on the previous one. The billionaire leaned forward, clearly intrigued by her methodical approach. His amusement from the first note had transformed into genuine interest. He rarely saw anyone approach his challenges with such clarity and patience. There was a spark of admiration in his gaze, tempered by surprise at how naturally she handled the task. He found himself asking questions, genuinely wanting to understand her reasoning, rather than simply mocking or testing her. The young waitress continued, her focus unwavering. She connected the unfamiliar words to concepts she knew, relying on her memory and intuition. It was a delicate balance of logic and instinct, and she moved through it with care. She noticed that with each correct interpretation, her confidence grew, reinforcing her belief that she could complete the task. She took her time, refusing to rush, knowing that accuracy mattered more than speed. Finally, after what felt like a long stretch of intense concentration, she spoke, explaining the meaning of the note in clear, simple terms. The billionaire's companions listened closely, some nodding in surprise, others exchanging impressed looks. The room once again fell into a hush as her explanation reached its conclusion. She had not only solved the puzzle but had done so with a calm authority that left everyone in awe. The billionaire laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the space. But it was no longer a mocking laugh. It carried genuine appreciation and a hint of disbelief. He had expected hesitation, confusion, or failure, but instead, he had witnessed intelligence, composure, and humility combined in a way that surprised him. He leaned back, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. She had done more than interpret a note. She had made a lasting impression. As she stepped back to resume her duties, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained charged. Staff and patrons alike felt the ripple of what had just occurred. The young waitress moved with renewed confidence, carrying trays and serving tables with a quiet grace. She had experienced a moment that few could imagine, a test of intellect and composure, witnessed by people of wealth and influence, and she had emerged successful. In the following hours, small conversations sparked around the restaurant. Diners whispered about the young woman who had silenced the billionaire with her insight. The staff exchanged glances, acknowledging the extraordinary display they had witnessed. For the young waitress, it was a mix of pride and humility, an understanding that her abilities could open doors she had never imagined. She focused on her work, but a subtle shift had occurred within her. She no longer saw herself as just another employee. She recognized the potential for greater things, a sense of possibility that had not been there before. The billionaire continued to watch her from his table intermittently, fascinated by the quiet strength she exhibited. He had encountered many people in his life who were brilliant or confident, but few who combined intelligence with modesty so seamlessly. There was an unspoken respect developing, a recognition that this young woman was remarkable in a way that went beyond his usual measures of success. As the lunch service ended and guests began to leave, the young waitress finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She reflected on the day, on the challenges she had faced, and on the confidence she had discovered within herself. She realized that life sometimes presented unexpected tests, and that the way one responded could define not only the present moment but also the future. The encounter with the billionaire had been brief, but its impact would last long after the restaurant returned to its usual pace. Even after the guests had departed and the restaurant quieted down, she found herself thinking about the notes, the interpretations, and the surprising acknowledgement she had received. She cleaned the tables and stacked the chairs, but her mind wandered to possibilities she had never considered before. The world felt larger, filled with opportunities that could be reached through focus, courage, and a willingness to engage with challenges. That day, she left the restaurant with a quiet sense of triumph. She knew that the encounter with the billionaire had changed something within her, a confidence and awareness that she could face challenges with composure and intelligence. It was a reminder that even ordinary moments, when approached with skill and focus, could lead to extraordinary outcomes. She walked home with her head held a little higher, ready for whatever life might present next, knowing that her abilities had been tested and proven in a way that would shape her journey for years to come. The day had started as a routine shift, but now it had turned into something unforgettable. The young waitress felt a quiet pride in herself, though she remained careful not to let it show too much. She went about her work, carrying trays and taking orders, but her mind often wandered back to the encounter with the billionaire. That small moment with the note had shown her that she could rise to challenges in ways she had never imagined. She felt a spark within herself, a feeling that she was capable of more than she had previously believed. After a short break, she returned to the restaurant for the afternoon rush. It was busy, with a new crowd of patrons arriving for lunch and early dinner. The clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation filled the room, but she felt calmer now. She moved with confidence, balancing plates, noting guests' needs, and maintaining her composure. Each task was done with precision, and yet her thoughts lingered on the earlier encounter. It was as if her mind had been opened to new possibilities, new ways to see the world and her own potential. The billionaire remained at his table, occasionally glancing her way. He had been quiet since their first interaction, but there was a sense of intrigue in his eyes. He was used to people performing, to showing skills, but very few had caught his attention like she had. There was something in the calm confidence and intelligence she displayed that he could not ignore. He had expected hesitation, confusion, or even fear, but instead, she had shown clarity and poise. This was unusual for him, and it made him sit up straighter, more attentive than he usually allowed himself. As the restaurant grew busier, he called her over again. She approached with careful steps, prepared to remain professional. He handed her another folded note, this one slightly thicker than the first. His smile hinted at amusement, but there was also a quiet curiosity. "Here's a little more for you," he said, his tone playful but gentle. "I wonder if you can interpret this one as well." She took the note with both hands, feeling the weight of the challenge once again. The characters and symbols on this page were different, a bit more complex, but she had learned to trust her instincts. She began to study it carefully, breaking it down into smaller parts, focusing on the patterns she could recognize. The world around her faded as she concentrated, each symbol and word demanding her attention. Her heart beat steadily, not from fear but from excitement. She liked challenges, and this one was especially stimulating. As she worked through the note, she began to notice connections and repetitions that helped her make sense of the text. Each line she deciphered brought a sense of satisfaction, as if she was solving a puzzle that had been placed in front of her for a reason. She whispered the initial interpretations softly under her breath, adjusting her understanding as she went along. She was careful to be precise, knowing that accuracy mattered more than speed. Around her, the restaurant continued its rhythm. Diners chatted quietly, staff moved swiftly between tables, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. People began to notice her focus, the quiet intensity of her concentration. Even those who were not directly watching sensed that something extraordinary was happening. The atmosphere had changed. There was a subtle energy that shifted from casual to attentive, all because of the young waitress and the challenge before her. The billionaire leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, clearly intrigued by her methodical approach. He had not expected her to handle the notes with such calm and confidence. Normally, people would struggle or falter, but she moved through the complexity with poise. He found himself listening intently, eager to hear her interpretations and understand her reasoning. There was an unspoken respect developing, a realization that she was not only intelligent but also composed under pressure. She continued, slowly piecing together the meaning of the note. Each segment made more sense as she connected the words and symbols, using both logic and intuition. Her mind moved fluidly between familiar and unfamiliar concepts, finding patterns that were not obvious at first glance. The tension in the room increased subtly, as those watching sensed that a breakthrough was imminent. Her quiet determination filled the space with a sense of anticipation. Finally, she spoke, explaining the meaning of the note with clarity and simplicity. Her voice was steady, her tone confident yet modest. The billionaire and his companions listened, some nodding in recognition, others exchanging surprised glances. The explanation she provided was accurate, and it demonstrated both intelligence and insight. It was not just about interpreting words. It was about understanding context, connecting ideas, and presenting them clearly. The billionaire's laughter returned, this time softer, warm, and genuine. He had not expected such a clear and composed interpretation. His amusement had transformed into admiration. He leaned back in his chair, watching her with a sense of intrigue and respect. The young waitress had not only met his challenge but had exceeded his expectations, showing skill, patience, and humility. She had proven that intelligence was not always loud or flashy. It could be quiet, steady, and remarkably effective. As she stepped back to continue her work, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained charged. Staff and diners whispered quietly, impressed by her performance. The young waitress felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, aware that she had handled an unusual challenge with grace. She returned to her duties, carrying trays and serving tables, but with a new confidence that affected the way she moved, spoke, and interacted with guests. Throughout the afternoon, she noticed that people treated her with a subtle new respect. It was not just the billionaire. Others had observed her calm intelligence and recognized it. She realized that moments like these, though brief, could have a lasting impact on the way others saw her. It was a small but powerful reminder that skill, composure, and humility could open doors, even in situations that seemed ordinary at first glance. The billionaire occasionally called her over for small questions, each time watching her approach with curiosity. He asked her about her thoughts, her reasoning, and even her perspective on certain details. She answered politely, honestly, and with clear thinking. He seemed fascinated not only by her ability to interpret the notes but by the way she carried herself, quietly confident and intelligent. It was an unusual experience for him, and he found himself intrigued beyond amusement. By the time the afternoon rush had passed, the young waitress felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had faced unexpected challenges, maintained her composure, and demonstrated her abilities in front of people who were accustomed to being impressed by many things. She had proven to herself and others that focus, patience, and intelligence could shine in any situation. It was a moment of growth, self-awareness, and confidence. As the restaurant settled into a slower pace, she found herself reflecting on the experience. She realized that her life had been momentarily transformed by a small note, a playful challenge, and the opportunity to rise to it. She had discovered a strength within herself, a quiet confidence that would remain long after the shift ended. Even as she cleared tables and organized dishes, she felt a sense of pride and possibility, knowing that her abilities had been recognized and that her potential was greater than she had imagined. Walking home that evening, she thought about the events of the day. The notes, the interpretations, the reactions, and the respect she had earned were all vivid in her mind. She understood that life sometimes offered challenges that seemed daunting at first, but that courage, patience, and intelligence could transform these moments into opportunities. The encounter with the billionaire had been brief, but its impact on her confidence and perspective was profound. She felt ready for whatever might come next, carrying with her the knowledge that even small, quiet actions could make a lasting impression and change the course of her life. The evening had arrived, bringing with it a softer light that filtered through the restaurant windows. The atmosphere was calmer than the afternoon rush, but there was still a quiet energy in the air. The young waitress moved through the tables with her usual attention to detail, noticing the small things that made guests feel welcome. Plates were cleared efficiently, drinks were refilled, and orders were taken with care. Yet, her mind often returned to the encounter with the billionaire, the notes, and the reactions of the people around her. She had become more aware of herself in subtle ways. Her posture was straighter, her steps more confident, and her voice carried a calm assurance that she had not noticed before. It was as if the challenge she had faced had awakened something inside her, a sense of capability she had never fully acknowledged. She found herself smiling more genuinely at guests, listening carefully to their requests, and taking pride in the quality of her work. The recognition, even if indirect, had changed the way she carried herself. The billionaire's table remained a point of focus. He had been quieter since the afternoon, but there was an unmistakable sense of intrigue in his demeanor. He observed her as she moved about the restaurant, noting the grace with which she handled multiple tasks, the patience in her interactions, and the subtle intelligence in her approach. There was a difference in how she managed the evening service compared to her earlier nervous energy. She was composed, attentive, and quietly confident. Eventually, he called her over once more. She approached cautiously, but with less hesitation than before. There was a new ease in her movements, a quiet assurance that came from experience and from the acknowledgement of her abilities. He handed her another note, slightly larger and more intricate than the previous ones. His smile carried both amusement and curiosity. "I'm curious to see if your skills hold up with this one," he said, his tone light yet genuinely interested. She took the note carefully, feeling the weight of the challenge once more. The writing was complex, with symbols and words that required careful attention. Yet she had grown in confidence and skill since the first note. She began to study it methodically, breaking it down into smaller sections and analyzing each piece. Her heart beat steadily, not from fear but from anticipation. She enjoyed the challenge, seeing it as an opportunity to test her abilities further. As she worked, she noticed subtle patterns and repetitions that helped her make sense of the content. She relied on both logic and intuition, drawing connections that were not immediately obvious. Her focus was intense, and the room seemed to fade around her. The clatter of dishes, the quiet conversations of guests, and the movement of staff all became background noise as she concentrated on deciphering the note. It was a test of patience and intellect, and she approached it with calm determination. The billionaire leaned forward, watching her closely. He was intrigued not just by her skill but by the way she approached the challenge. There was a quiet respect developing, a recognition that this young waitress possessed qualities that were rare: intelligence, composure, and the ability to think clearly under pressure. He asked a few subtle questions, not to challenge her further, but to understand her thought process. She answered with clarity, her explanations precise and thoughtful. Slowly, she began to piece together the meaning of the note. Each segment she interpreted with care, ensuring that her understanding was accurate. She whispered her conclusions quietly at first, adjusting as needed, and then began to speak them more confidently. The billionaire and his companions listened intently, impressed by her ability to navigate complexity with calm and clarity. Her explanations were not just about the words on the page. They conveyed understanding, insight, and an ability to see connections that others might miss. When she finished, the room fell into a quiet hush. The billionaire's expression shifted from curiosity to admiration. He had expected hesitation or error, but instead, he witnessed composure, intelligence, and humility. The young waitress had not only met the challenge but had surpassed it. Her calm authority and accurate interpretation silenced the room, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. As she stepped back to resume her duties, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained charged. Guests and staff whispered quietly among themselves, impressed by her performance. The young waitress felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, aware that she had handled an unusual challenge with grace and intelligence. She moved with renewed confidence, carrying trays and serving tables with a subtle elegance that reflected her inner growth. Throughout the evening, she continued to notice how people responded to her. There was a newfound respect in the way guests interacted with her, and even her colleagues seemed to view her differently. It was not about fame or recognition. It was about the quiet acknowledgement of skill and composure that she had demonstrated. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her abilities had been tested and proven in a meaningful way. The billionaire occasionally called her over for small questions, each time observing her approach with keen interest. He asked about her reasoning, her perspective on the notes, and her thoughts on how she had reached her conclusions. She answered politely and thoughtfully, maintaining her calm demeanor. He seemed fascinated not only by her skill but by the way she carried herself, intelligent, composed, and unassuming. It was a rare combination that left him genuinely impressed. As the restaurant quieted down for the night, the young waitress reflected on the events of the day. She realized that her life had been momentarily transformed by a series of small challenges, each one revealing a strength she had not fully acknowledged. She had faced unexpected tests, maintained her composure, and demonstrated her abilities in front of people who were accustomed to being impressed by many things. It was a moment of growth, self-awareness, and quiet triumph. When the last guests had left and the lights of the restaurant dimmed, she took a deep breath and allowed herself to feel the impact of the day. She had discovered a quiet confidence, an understanding of her own potential, and a sense of pride in her abilities. Even in moments of challenge, she had shown composure, intelligence, and humility. It was a reminder that the way one approaches challenges can define not only the present moment but also the opportunities that lie ahead. Walking home that night, she thought about the billionaire, the notes, and the reactions of those around her. She realized that life sometimes presented challenges that seemed daunting, but that courage, patience, and intelligence could turn these moments into opportunities. She felt ready for whatever might come next, carrying with her the knowledge that even small, quiet actions could make a lasting impression and potentially change the course of her life. The evening had been extraordinary, not because of wealth or power, but because of the subtle transformation within herself, a quiet awakening of confidence, insight, and capability that would remain with her forever. The following morning, the young waitress arrived at the restaurant with a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the previous day had left a lasting impression, not just on her but on the staff and guests as well. She moved with quiet confidence, greeting the morning team with a warm smile and taking in the familiar sights and sounds of the restaurant. The clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, and the soft chatter of the kitchen felt different now. They were familiar, comforting, and yet full of potential for something extraordinary. As she prepared for the lunch rush, she reflected on the encounters with the billionaire. The notes, the challenges, and the reactions had shown her abilities in ways she had never imagined. It was more than just interpreting words. It was about understanding context, thinking critically, and maintaining composure under observation. She had discovered a side of herself that was both capable and resilient, and it had left her with a quiet pride that she carried into every task. The billionaire returned to the restaurant that day, accompanied by his usual entourage. He was seated in the same corner, but this time his gaze found her almost immediately. There was a subtle smile on his face, a recognition of her presence and the skills she had displayed. He had been impressed by her intelligence and composure, and now it seemed he was curious to see more of what she could do. The young waitress felt a flutter of anticipation, but it was mixed with calm. She was ready to handle whatever came next. When she approached his table to take the order, he greeted her warmly and handed her another folded note. This one was thicker, containing more text and more complex symbols. His eyes twinkled with curiosity as he said, "I'd like to see how you handle this one. I think you're ready." There was no mockery in his tone. Instead, it was genuine interest and admiration. She took the note carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility once again. She studied the note intently, breaking it down into manageable sections. Her mind worked steadily, drawing on knowledge, intuition, and logical reasoning. The restaurant around her faded as she focused entirely on the challenge. She whispered tentative interpretations under her breath, adjusting as she went along, and gradually, the meaning began to become clear. The more she worked, the more confident she felt. Each correct interpretation reinforced her understanding and determination. The billionaire observed her closely, clearly fascinated by the way she approached the task. He had met countless people who were intelligent or skilled, but very few combined composure, humility, and critical thinking as naturally as she did. He asked a few questions not to challenge her, but to understand her thought process. She responded thoughtfully, explaining her reasoning with clarity and precision. Her calm confidence impressed him even more, and he leaned back in his chair, watching her work with a mix of curiosity and admiration. As she pieced together the meaning of the note, she felt a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. Each segment she deciphered confirmed her skill and insight. She began to speak her interpretations aloud, clearly and confidently, making sure each explanation was accurate. The billionaire and his companions listened intently, nodding in recognition and expressing quiet amazement. Her ability to connect ideas, understand context, and convey her understanding with clarity had left a lasting impression on everyone at the table. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the billionaire's reaction. He smiled, a deep and genuine smile, and applauded softly. He had not expected such a clear and composed interpretation. Her performance went beyond his expectations, demonstrating intelligence, patience, and humility. He had been silenced by her skill, and he appreciated the quiet authority she carried. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table, and spoke with genuine respect. "You have a remarkable talent," he said. "It's rare to see someone handle challenges like this with both intelligence and humility. I would like to offer you an opportunity that goes beyond the restaurant." The young waitress felt a mix of surprise and anticipation. She listened carefully as he explained his proposal. A collaboration on a project that required her skills, insight, and composure. It was an opportunity she had never imagined, a chance to step into a world she had only observed from the periphery. She considered his words carefully. The offer was extraordinary, but it was not just about wealth or recognition. It was about trust, responsibility, and the chance to apply her abilities in a meaningful way. She felt a quiet sense of validation, knowing that her skills had been recognized by someone who had seen countless talented individuals. It was more than a reward. It was an acknowledgement of her potential and her capability to rise to challenges. As she accepted the opportunity, she felt a sense of calm excitement. This was a turning point, a moment where her life could change in ways she had never anticipated. She realized that her experiences at the restaurant, the notes, the challenges, the quiet observation of others, had prepared her for this very moment. She had discovered strength, intelligence, and composure within herself, and now she had the chance to use them on a larger stage. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She continued her work at the restaurant with renewed energy, but her mind was alive with possibilities. She imagined the projects she might work on, the people she would meet, and the skills she would develop. She understood that her journey was just beginning, and that the challenges she had faced had been a preparation for something greater. Each small task, each interaction, had been building her confidence and sharpening her abilities. By the evening, the restaurant was quieter, and she found a moment to reflect. She thought about how far she had come, from a nervous waitress on her first day to someone recognized for intelligence, composure, and insight. The encounter with the billionaire had been brief, but its impact was profound. She had learned that even small, unexpected challenges could reveal strengths and opportunities she had never considered. Walking home that night, she felt a sense of accomplishment and possibility. The city lights reflected in the streets, and the world seemed full of opportunities waiting to be explored. She understood that her abilities had been tested, proven, and acknowledged, and that her life could now take a direction shaped by her own skills and choices. The experience had shown her the value of focus, patience, intelligence, and humility, and she carried these lessons with her. The young waitress knew that her journey was only beginning. The opportunity offered by the billionaire was not just a reward. It was a chance to grow, to challenge herself further, and to make an impact beyond the restaurant. She felt ready for the next steps, confident in her abilities and aware of the potential she had discovered within herself. It was a moment of transformation, a recognition that her quiet intelligence and composure could open doors to experiences she had only dreamed of. As she reached her home, she paused to take in the night sky. The stars seemed brighter, the world fuller of possibilities. She understood that life often presented challenges in unexpected ways, and that how one responded to them could define the course of the future. She had faced a test she did not ask for, met it with composure and intelligence, and had been rewarded not just with opportunity, but with a deeper understanding of her own strength and potential. That night, she went to bed with a sense of peace and anticipation. She had learned that confidence was not about being loud or commanding attention, but about understanding one's abilities and using them thoughtfully. She had discovered that challenges, when met with focus and calm, could lead to unexpected and extraordinary outcomes. And she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that would be shaped by her intelligence, composure, and the quiet courage she had shown in the face of unexpected opportunity.